Hello and welcome to the Circle's International Women's Day event. I'm Raki Sharp, Chief Executive of the Circle, and firstly, a very happy International Women's Day to you all. We're so thrilled to see so many people from around the world joining. We've got current members, new supporters, partners. Wonderful to bring everybody together. So this evening or this morning, wherever you are in the world, we are going to bring you an hour of hopefully inspiring conversation, performance and films. And we hope you leave energised, inspired and wanting to join the Circle movement. This year has been devastating for all of us, but in particularly for women and girls around the world. We have seen soaring cases of domestic violence, and the Gates Foundation estimate that the 25 years of gains made in gender equality will be wiped out in 25 weeks. The Circle will be doubling down in its efforts this year, supporting more grassroots women-led projects and also building more advocacy and structural change. To that end, we're doing some really exciting projects. The Lawyers Circle are working on advocating for a living wage for garment workers and taking that to the EU. And as an organisation, we've just joined the Crack the Crisis Coalition, which is an organisation of over 50 UK charitable organisations lobbying the UK government ahead of the G7 summit. So we've got lots to be doing this year, and International Women's Day is always a key moment for us to all recommit to gender equality and women's rights. Those of you that don't know the Circle, we're a unique organisation galvanising the collective power of women to support the most vulnerable women and girls around the world. We have the most extraordinary women from all walks of life who've joined us, and you're so welcome. International Women's Day, we've launched a positive and uplifting campaign, Circles of Change, that takes us back to the roots of the Circle, amplifying and celebrating and inspiring women in your lives that make up your circles of change. It could be your mum, your sister, it could be an inspiring activist, it could be a notable person striving to make change. We'd love you to pop into the chat box the inspiring women that are in your lives, and here's a little film about the campaign.
The women who inspire me to make a difference around the world are all the garment workers that I met across many supply chains around the world when I had the opportunity to travel and meet them and chat to them. And this is why this International Women's Day, I pledge to continue fighting on their behalf for a much fairer fashion world where they are valued the same as we are in our countries and by wearing the clothes that we wear.
Hi, I'm Patricia Homora from Uganda. I'm inspired by different adults and girls and young women that take up leadership spaces with different policymakers to influence policies and participate in decision making. This is because adolescent girls and young women experience different challenges and they need to be heard and listened to. I pledge to continue supporting different adolescent girls and young women to influence policies that look at creating period-friendly communities, ending period poverty and period inequalities. Thank you.
I am most inspired by my three daughters. I want a world where they can be anything and everything they want to be. A world with no misogyny, sexism, racism, or any other expression of hate. Now, I know that sounds idealistic, but I think it's possible. On behalf of women and girls all around the world, I pledge to fight for equality and justice.
So we'd love to hear who the inspiring women and people are in your lives that make up your circles of change. If you pop them in the chat box, I'm sure we'll all be able to view them and be inspired by each other. So who's in my circles of change? I mean, I think it's got to be my two young, extraordinary daughters who will make up the next wave of global feminists. Of course, it's got to be the women that I've met on my many trips across the world, from the women in Rohingya fleeing the atrocities in Myanmar to the women I met in Guatemala whose daughters had been abducted and no sight of them for years. to also trailblazers, including men, because we need lots of men on the journey for gender equality. So people like Vogue editor Edward Enninful, who's making strides in publishing and changing the landscape of that area. So next up, we've got a conversation with the brilliant, wonderful broadcaster Lindsay Hilson and Dima Hamden, who is the manager and editor of the Marie Colvin Journalists Network. That is one of the projects that sits under the wing of the Circle, and I'm really excited for you to hear more about it. So Lindsay and Dima, welcome to the Circle's International Women's Day event. We are so delighted to have you, especially when you're both incredibly busy. So welcome today, and such a delight that we're going to have a chance to talk about different project partners, including the Marie Colvin Journalist Network and the legacy of Marie. So Lindsay, if I could come to you first, so many of the people watching will have followed and Marie's work and her life, and particularly read your book In Extremis, which I have to say, when it first came out, I sat and read the whole thing in one sitting and was blown away. I bought so many copies for friends and family. I just found it the most extraordinary book. But for those watching who haven't maybe known Marie as closely or followed her work, could you tell us a little bit about how you knew her and some of the extraordinary work she undertook?
Well, Marie was really the extraordinary war correspondent of my generation. She was American, but she worked most of her career for the Sunday Times. And she went all over the world. But the place which I think she loved the best was the Middle East. And she spent a lot of time there. She spent a lot of time in Israel and in Palestine, reporting on what was a time of hope when people were hoping for peace. But she was also in Chechnya. There was an incredible story of the Christmas of 1999, where she had gone in with the Chechen rebels and was bombed from the air by the Russians and ended up being pinned down in the snow and then having to walk for days over the Caucasus Mountains to safety. I mean, a journey that so few of us can imagine doing, let alone surviving. And then Marie, in 2001, went in with the Tamil Tigers at the height of the war in Sri Lanka, and crossing back into government territory, she was shot in the eye. And she lost the sight in that eye. So from then on, she had to wear an eye patch. And that really became the badge of bravery. And that became the way people knew her. She was the lady with the eye patch. And I think that one of the things that her friends always love about her is that, you know, Marie was such a serious, important war correspondent, and she was such a party girl as well. And she had several of those eye patches with sequins and rhinestones on for parties, because, you know, you've got to have something sparkly, haven't you?
Well, you've got very bright clothes on today, so maybe you're kind of carrying on a little bit of that legacy with through some of the attire. What do you think drove Marie personally? What was her mission? Because she was incredibly brave, but as you say, incredibly warm and convivial as well. So quite a mix of characters.
Well, really, you know, it was uncovering injustice more than anything else, and uncovering the stories of people who, you know, end up in wars in the most terrible situations. So obviously that's women and it's children and it's people who are being bombed, but also conscripts. But Marie lost her life in Syria in February 2012 because she had gone back into a besieged suburb called Babarama in Homs, as the Syrian revolution was turning into war. And she just wanted to stay there and to be there with people and to carry on reporting the terrible conditions they were in. And the Syrian government attacked, and she and a young French photographer, Remy Oshlik, were killed. So she lost her life doing what she believed in.
And incredible the amount of people whose, I guess, hidden stories and injustices, as you say, that she brought to the forefront that may not have ever been uncovered, really. So the stories that you all as journalists go out to get is extraordinary. I guess we're so in debt to all of you to, you know, to take on that bravery. You obviously mentioned that Marie lost her life. It's time's flown by incredibly quickly, and it was the 9th anniversary of her death
I
only
can't believe that it's 9 years.
last week. I mean, since then, you and others, including Lise Doucette and Jane Wellesley and the team, have set up this incredible project and her legacy. Can you tell us a bit about how it came about?
Well, after Marie was killed, obviously we knew her name would never die, but we wanted a legacy for her. And Marie was always very encouraging to young journalists, and especially, but not exclusively, to women, and again, especially, but not exclusively, in the Middle East. And so we thought what would be a great project would be to do something which supported young female journalists in the Middle East, because at that time, 10 years ago, we're talking about the Arab Spring, and a lot of new journalists were coming up in the region. You know, it's not like the old days of just being, you know, some old white bloke in a safari suit going away and bringing back the news from abroad. Now people are reporting on their own communities, and this is so strong and so important. But you know, it's very the young women who are reporting from the Middle East are under incredible stresses and strains, similar, some of them, to the ones that we are under, people who go in and out, but many more as well. And also, I think that we felt that Marie's life was exemplary in the sense that she was a fantastic journalist, but also cautionary. She didn't look after herself enough. She should have looked after herself more. And I think that that's something which we also think is really important about young women looking after their bodies, being safe, and also their minds, because these are very stressful situations. So this was the project we decided to start, to try and support those young women. And this is where Dima comes in, who is our brilliant manager and editor.
Yeah, so Dima, tell us a bit more about how the project has developed over the years, and you know, things that you're trying to achieve and the support the network's giving to female journalists.
Well, I mean, I joined the network before it was set up. I remember very well doing the job interview in Jordan with Lise and Lindsay on Skype, and Anna Redoubt at the time, and that was November 2015. And I started the following month, and I had just relocated to Berlin. And when we started, I mean, they gave me the mandate, and then there was a process of researching. And very early on, we realized that this network should be focused on Arab female journalists, because we felt that, you know, Western or international correspondents, they come with their own, you know, support networks somehow, and they have their privileges, and they have the privileges of their Western passports that can get them back to safety when they need to. But the more research we did, we realized, you know, it's the local journalists, if we're talking about Palestine or Iraq or Syria or Egypt or Sudan, they're not just reporters, they are part of the story itself. I mean, right now, you know, five years ago when we were establishing the network, I didn't realize that we would come to a point where our journalists will be part of the internally displaced people from conflict in their countries, that some of our journalists will be, you know, moving and living in exile because they're being prosecuted by their own governments. So we started with, you know, I think the wonderful thing about this network is we just started using our own instincts. You know, we weren't set up by a group of established people with background in how to set up an NGO. You know, we were all journalists, and we thought, if we were the journalists benefiting from this network, what kind of support would we have liked to have? And honestly, I did not think, I mean, I didn't imagine that we would, you know, come this far. But now we're beyond the phase of inception. Now we have an identity. You know, we are an online community of over 220 women from across the MENA region. And now we're being, you know, approached by international organizations who want, you know, us to help them with our expertise and, you know, explaining how do we offer support for these women. And whether it's the mentorship, you know, a lot of these women, they come from various backgrounds. Some of them did not have professional education in journalism, or they don't necessarily work in the most, you know, professional setups. They're being mentored by, you know, amazing women like Samia Nakhul from Thomson Reuters, or Rila Khalaf, sorry, from the Financial Times, or Zaina Khudr, who just won the RTS award at Al Jazeera International. So it's such an amazing platform where you're connecting, you know, these young women with amazing mentors, and together they're helping each other, you know, they're supporting each other and they're inspiring each other. We did not imagine there would be a time when we would be even more hands-on involved when it comes to things like mental health support, when it comes to, you know, emergency support, if it's connecting them to organizations or governments. So it's just overwhelming to look back at, you know, how we've evolved in the last 5 years, and we feel that we're continuing to get bigger and bigger. And I think the best thing about this network is the work is not just done by us as staff, it's actually done by the members and the mentors. How they support each other, how they open up doors for one another, how they contribute the occasional, you know, article on the website that has really vital information. This network is basically alive and growing because women want to give something back. And I think that's what makes it very special.
I want to interrupt because this network is also alive and growing because of Dima and because of Pippa Nairn, who is our coordinator manager. Yeah. And the amount and Abir, who is the deputy to Dima. Because I think that one of the things that we hadn't understood when we started, Lise and Jane and I, was just how much hands-on work there would be. And so with Pippa, she's liaising all the time with other organizations. She's working so hard on that and looking at policy and strategy. And then I think Dima spends half her life on WhatsApp and Signal, just trying to sort out women's problems. And so it's very hands-on. And Abir constantly looking for opportunities for the women, you know, whether it's, hostile environment courses or training or jobs which are coming up. So they are providing the bedrock of support. And then the network itself and the women helping each other comes along with that.
And I can absolutely agree with you, Lindsay. The three of them are extraordinary women driving this project. And Dima, you talked about something which I thought there's such synergy with what the Circle does and its project partners of bringing women together, but also using skills and resources to kind of help each other really drive change. So there's a wonderful connection there of us being partners together. This year, you touched upon it a little bit, Dima, about emergencies has been an extraordinary year for everybody, but in particular, women and girls have been really hit hard in a lot of these countries. And I think some of the stories you've been hearing over the last year and how the network has pivoted to emergency funding and support. Could you just tell us a little bit about some of those stories and how the network supported?
I mean, yes, this year has been exceptional, and it continues to, 2021 continues to bring more challenges. I think the worst thing that happened is a lot of our members found themselves out of work. Mostly because of COVID. A lot of our members, come from countries, like I said, some of them are internally displaced in their own countries and they've became refugees in neighboring countries. So, we have, on the one hand, we have members who are, the breadwinners of the family. They have to provide for their children and their parents and even their spouses who can't work. And then on the other hand, we have women who got stranded in other countries and they're all on their own and like living in a state of isolation. And I could confidently say this, in some particular cases, we were a lifeline. And I did not imagine that it would come to this point, but the kind of support that we offered to these women helped sustain them at very critical times. But it wasn't just COVID. I think because everybody's focusing on COVID, we're also not talking about the fact that press freedoms have deteriorated to an unprecedented level in some of the countries. And that was also making things very difficult for some of our members. I mean, some of them were extremely frustrated just because they couldn't really report on, the COVID situation the way that they wanted to, because they were bound. Some of them wanted to do some very sensitive investigations about, corruption within public institutions, and they found themselves being intercepted and harassed, and in some cases even, detained. So we found ourselves with this situation where no two cases are the same. You've got 220 women and you have all of these situations, and we had to come up with a way to try to help as many of them directly as we can. And for those whom we cannot directly offer support, we were networking to find other organizations that could lend them the support. So it wasn't just, it wasn't like charity handouts. We were helping people with their basic expenses, but we were also helping, women with, their mental and emotional health. And in fact, that mental health support, I would say very early on, since we were first established, when in 2016, we began to see a pattern, and we realized this is something where we're going to be more involved. We're not just going to, help them go off and see someone. We decided that this is something that's a vital component of the support that we do. And in fact, it continues to be. And I have to say, we were also very helpful, I think, like Lindsay mentioned, Abir, our communications coordinator, she worked extra hard to find more opportunities and to make sure that there is a regular bulletin going out to the members. So whether there's a job opportunity, if there's a competition, if there's a fellowship, if there's training, we very quickly realized that we became the main source. Like, they just wait for our bi-monthly bulletin, or they keep an eye on our posts on, Facebook and Twitter. If anything, the bulletin is probably the number one, most important service. That alone has been also a lifeline for a lot of the members this year. It's been very distressing. I mean, even for us as editor and manager and coordinator, to have to deal with these cases and pick up the phone and talk to them, it did take its toll at some point. But the thing about this network, we don't treat members as numbers. We send out mass emails because we can't communicate with everyone at the same time. But like Lindsay said, if we feel we have to, we will pick up the phone and we will talk to someone, and we will be with them on Signal or WhatsApp. And there's always, you kind of always draw certain limits and boundaries in a job like this, because you have to look after yourself, but you can't just, go to bed and ignore that a member is in need. It has been challenging, but I think we're very sincere in our endeavor, and our members know that we are, and they make the most of it. And yeah, I think I have to say that this network, with all the challenges, is probably by far has been and will probably be the proudest thing I've ever done.
You can hear the passion in your voice, Deepa, and I'm not going to make you any more emotional, because I know it's been a really, really tough couple of not only days, weeks, and obviously we've been trying to support kind of getting those emergency transfers out as much as possible. And I'd really like to say thank you to kind of everyone who's watching who has donated, particularly through our COVID appeal and through to the network as well. Briefly, Lindsay, I know you've been traveling a lot and obviously through the pandemic somewhat. I guess more broadly, like the impact on women and girls across the world. Any sort of insights or thoughts you want to share on what you've been coming across?
Well, I think that we haven't seen it yet. I think that there's going to be huge waves of poverty. To some extent, we've seen it in Lebanon, which already had a financial crisis and an economic crisis before that. People losing their jobs, people with nothing to eat. That is what we are going to have as this economic crisis out of the health crisis moves across the world like a tsunami. And in these situations, of course, it's women who are always the ones who are most affected. And the women in our networks are the ones who are trying to raise awareness of that and report on that. And as Dima says, a lot of governments don't want that story out. And so they're going to need our continued support to try and tell that really important story of how the health and financial and economic crisis is affecting people.
Thank you, Lindsay and Dima. I can't let you go without asking you one question, which is a central theme that's been running throughout the Circle's International Women's Day campaign. So we launched a new campaign called Circles of Change, which is sort of a positive and uplifting campaign we wanted to do this year, which is sort of highlighting who are the inspiring women in your lives. So it could be your friends, your family, it could be change makers, and yeah, making sure that they get the kind of amplification as well. So I guess, Lindsay, who's in your circle of change currently, or could be historical figures that inspire you?
I'm going to be so predictable, aren't I? It's got to be Lise Doucette and Jane Wellesley, who set up the network with me, who we do our Zoom drinks and we moan and complain about our lives, but we're also so happy about the network and what it's doing. And then obviously it has to be Marie, because I think Marie has inspired us all. I have to say, I can't think of anyone who would have coped worse with lockdown than Marie. I mean,
Really?
She was the woman you could not keep down. She would have gone crazy. But I do like to think that she would be happy with the work that's being done in her name. I think she would have loved our network.
Oh. And Dima, to you, who's in your, now if you don't say Lindsay, Jane and
No, I think I'm gonna go a bit more personal. I would say it's my older sister, Resha, just because she has always been a role model and an inspiration for me. And I think nobody will understand this, only her. And I hope that she watches this, but she is like the queen of metamorphoses, just moving from one chapter to the next in her life without, worrying about, traditional codes, and just, switching into whatever she wants to switch into in her life is, is very liberating to observe.
Well, she sounds like an extraordinary woman, and the two of you together must be quite a fun pair. Look, Lindsay and Dima, I wanted to say thank you for taking the time to kind of talk to us about Marie and the network. We are passionate advocates of it, and anyone watching, if they'd like to find out more about MCJN or any of our kind of current grassroots project partners, they can visit the Circle website, or the Marie Colvin Journalist Network's also got its own website to find out more. So happy International Women's Day, both of you. Keep on the extraordinary work, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Happy International Women's Day to everybody.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
In 2020, the biggest public health crisis in our lifetime put thousands of women and girls at greater risk of violence, fear and poverty. From garment workers losing their jobs overnight to vulnerable women living in lockdown with their abusers, thousands were facing intolerable circumstances induced by the pandemic. Circle has long been there for the world's most vulnerable women and girls, and we continue to do so at a time of great urgency. Thank you, Lindsay and Dima, for telling us more about the Marie Colvin Journalist Network, a quite extraordinary project. And also you will have seen from the film some of the amazing support that members have been giving to our project partners on the ground through our COVID appeal and the difference we've made over the year. So coming to our last conversation with our founder, Annie Lennox, talking to Baroness Lola Young.
Over the last 100 years, women's rights in some parts of the world have come a long way. More women and girls across the globe now have basic human rights, such as access to education, freedom from violence, maternal health rights, equal employment, and a right to vote. More, but not all. 1 in 3 women and girls are impacted by physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. Over 2.7 billion women are legally restricted from having the same choice of jobs as men. Women make up only 22.8% of the world's parliamentarian seats. 99% of all maternal deaths occur in developing countries. Out of the 757 million adults who cannot read or write, 2 out of 3 are women. 603 million women live in countries where domestic violence is not considered a crime. Around the world, we still have a very long way to go before every woman and girl has access to equal rights. That is why we stand together as global feminists.
Hi.
Hi. Wow.
Lovely to see you.
It's lovely to see you
How
too.
amazing.
Wow, I know, isn't it? Isn't it just? I'm just
I
taking
mean, the last time we met, I mean, who could have foreseen all of this?
Crazy.
Mm.
Absolutely crazy. And yet here we are doing this amazing Zoom thing, which is our substitute for physical contact. And it has been amazing because actually, on the one hand, you know, we feel so isolated. And on the other hand, we're able to actually facilitate these connections that didn't happen in the same, you know, just wouldn't have happened in the same kind of way. People are more, in a way, I thought, more accessible.
Well, if you think what would have happened had this pandemic broken out 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about in a way, because there would be a kind of complete breakdown in communication. And I think, you know, part of what we prove every time something happens is how adaptable we are as human beings, which is not to say that we like it and want to be like this forever, but we find these ways around. And what they're saying now is that the technology, the whole kind of digital world, has accelerated by about 5 years. So we're where we thought we would be in 2025 with regard to digital services and our thinking about that.
When we get connected with even one individual person's story and it touches your heart, and you realize that the whole inequity of everything is unacceptable.
Totally unacceptable. It's totally unacceptable, and we can't be complicit in maintaining that level of unacceptability. It's like, you know, I think what you're saying is so interesting, because if you think about empathy, for example, so to me, I think some people obviously are able to have more empathy than others. That's abundantly clear, because if you had an ounce of empathy, would you think it was all right for a child to be curled up on the floor underneath her mother's sewing machine, you know, instead of being able to go to school and have proper meals and have enough money to do the things that children should be doing? and thinking that's okay because I get a cheap pair of trousers out of it. You know, how can that be? How can that be about being, you know, a connection between one human and another? And I think businesses, you know, at the very top of those businesses, they need to be there and see some of those situations that they've had a direct hand in perpetrating. I think it's really important for them to understand what it is they're doing all day, every day.
And that's part of our job in a way. Once you've decided that you want to participate in saying, listen, this is unacceptable, you become, this is the activist that is woken up. It becomes active in you. You know what? It doesn't go away. You don't unsee it. You don't undo it. I can never be the person that I might have been before I wasn't actually, because I always had that, you know, that empathy thing.
I bet you did. I bet you did always have that wanting to challenge things, didn't you?
Yes. As far back as I can remember, I had that awareness of injustice because of, you know, I come from, I hate to say, it's such a cliche. I come from a working class background, but I do. And class was a massive thing, and it still is. It's never gone away. So I come from a family that was aware of injustice, you know, from working in the shipyards, and, you know, it goes back, my inheritance goes back to the agricultural days when, you know, the industrialist times, people moving from working in the land to going into factories. My great-great-great-grandmother going as this sort of, what would be a skivvy, a sort of servant going to work in a factory. So when I'm, you know, you have this awareness and it expands and it never stops expanding because actually it's never gone away. The Victorian moors of, you know, these stratas of people's living experiences, what Dickens wrote about, children going to work in the mines, children going up chimneys, all of that, that hasn't gone away.
No, it hasn't. It's just mutated into something else.
I mean, you know, it's been there all around the world. It's just that, yes, exactly. So it's split, didn't it? So that in our lifetime, Lola, because we both come from the same generation. I was born in 1954. In our lifetime, what we have shared, even from a different lens, okay, is so much change, like exponential change. And you and I both want to be part of the change that helps to see the horrible things that you've just described. A child lying underneath her mother's sewing machine while she works a 15-hour day, let's say. That's unacceptable. And you're connecting it through to the fashion chain where people how can I say, we innocently purchase because we are consumers. That's what we do. So it all feeds in and everything is part of everything else.
So it's interesting because activism, I mean, I think it's a great word, and it, you know, it took me ages to accept that people saw me as an activist because I think, well, I'm not really doing very much. I don't mean that in a kind of humble pie kind of way. I just mean, you know, you're in Parliament, that's your job. But, you know, can we make a switch from being consumers, which always sounds very passive to me? Can we be active citizens? Now, that's not to say that everybody can do everything and run around, you know, like I do, like you do, and like so many others do. Not everybody's in the position to do that because, as you say, class still exists. The class divide in this country still exists. And if the pandemic has shown us anything, is that whilst the disease itself may not discriminate, the circumstances in which it can flourish do. So we know that poorer people, people from Black and minority ethnic communities and people with disabilities have suffered the most from the pandemic. So there's things that go on here that mean that some people don't have the spare capacity to make those changes because they're too busy trying to work out how to put food on the table, right? So when I say, oh, the consumer or the active citizen should think about their complicity, I'm not talking to that particular person unless they feel they've got something they can do. But for those of us who can, we should. We should.
For those of us who can. Beautiful. And we can, and there is something
yeah.
collectively that we can do. You know, the circle is aspirational. And we've been around now for about 13 years, and we've sort of, it's been quite malleable. People have come and gone. And I've thought about it. I thought very deeply before this conversation with you, because there's so much I want to say, and we only have 25 minutes. But in this short period of time, I just wanted to say, wow, you know, it doesn't really matter whether you come and go, because if you carry some of the consciousness that you might not have had because you came to a circle event and something happened. I've seen it when I've spoken with people in a circle event and they've become inspired. I know that they've gone, and it's not just me, obviously. I'm not talking about myself like a preacher, you know, I've inspired anybody, but by coming together in that moment and just kind of waking up to something and going out of the hall. Obviously, this is a kind of town hall experience that we're having right now, that you might carry just a little bit of a fire, like a little fire that maybe you didn't recognize it before. And it might not be the time to become, you know, fully active yet. But if you carry that just a little bit, it's different from when you came in the room. And maybe there'll be a time when it catalyzes.
Absolutely, because there'll be that conversation that you're having with somebody who might make some kind of generalized statement that doesn't sit right with you. And this is why I always think, you know, when people say, oh, you shouldn't be preaching, you're always preaching to the converted. To me, it's like you've got to help people and support people to have the strength to be able to combat these countervailing forces that we all, you know, encounter, like, oh, well, you know, the deserving poor and the undeserving poor, or people who scrounge off benefits and blah, blah, blah. If they were better qualified and went to school, you know, all of those things. You need to be able to have those arguments and to kind of rebuff those in a really confident way. And I think going to the kinds of events that you talk about, going to, and you know, even literally going to, but listening to and hearing about what other people are doing. I think it's really important to help people have that strength, because it can feel like a very lonely place, especially if you're like, you know, a young woman in working with a well-known brand in some way, and it's like your opinion isn't really listened to. How do you make your voice heard? How do you get that feeling that you can make those changes?
Right, absolutely. And when you describe it as a lonely place, I mean, I can tell you that, you know, when we converge once a year around International Women's Day, it feels like, oh yeah, for me, you know, yes, that I'm coming up to the plate, I'm showing up. Just show up. Just show up. That will make a difference. You know, 1 and 1 make 3 in our instance. You know, we have to, because if I don't show up, it's done. I mean, that's my contribution is over. And I personally, you know, have been looking for like-minded souls, like kindred spirits, like yourself. I've been trying to do this, and sometimes it's felt lonely. And that was the whole reason why the notion of a circle it could just be 2, a circle of 2, because it's a sphere of influence, and it doesn't have to be, like you say, it doesn't have to be massive, but it just starts with you, then there's another person, maybe someone else, and you seek each other out. And International Women's Day has almost become like a shop window where we show up, you know, we say we're here, we're still here. COVID-19 has set us back. It's set the whole feminist movement back, I think. Feminist, I mean, the empowerment of women. When women have been locked down with violent partners, very, very difficult. I mean, we saw that surge of 75% of domestic violence all of a sudden. I mean, it beggars belief. So where do we go? Well, we just have to, as you say, pick ourselves up. What can we do? So we're still here.
That thing about domestic violence is a really good example of how, by asking the wrong kinds of questions, we've not managed to come up with a decent solution to that, so that we still have what is effectively 2 women every week in so-called normal times dying at the hand of their partners. So how come is it, you know, that this problem is still there in such a big, big way? And not just here in this country, obviously, and that isn't confined to any one class, as you know. So it's global, it's trans-historical, it's trans-cultural. You know, I was reading something the other day about somebody who'd murdered his wife because didn't like the way she talked to him, and all, you know, we've got to grapple with all of this stuff. But it can seem, the thing is, for a lot of people, it seems like a huge thing. It is huge. I mean, it's like, okay, we're going to wipe out domestic violence. Yeah, like whatever, how are you going to do that? But obviously, what I always say back to people is, well, okay, so what's your solution then? Are we just going to sit in the corner and cry about it? Or are we just going to say, oh, well, that's life, and get on with it? You have to do something, I feel, if you can.
I personally felt that responsibility so strongly. I feel it so strongly because, you know, I've always thought in terms of sisterhood, to be quite frank. I've always thought my gender and the fact that I'm a mother gives me a sense of responsibility to other mothers. I think about women that I've seen in hospitals in certain countries that have had to come to deliver their baby on the floor outside the hospital because there was no chance for her to have a hospital bed. You know, this kind of thing that once you see it and you say, well, I've had the privilege to have, you know, decent medical care, and I've kind of took it a bit for granted. You know, the national health is an health system in the UK. It's an extraordinary thing.
You know, it goes back to what you were saying much earlier in the conversation about the way that you're brought up and what you can see as you're through your upbringing, what you saw about working class life and about the women in your life, and how that made you think, or how that shaped and informed the way in which you think. And I think that is a big part of it. But I would also say that those people who've had a much more privileged upbringing, you know, it's incumbent upon them to think about where their privilege comes from. It doesn't come out of this thin air, and it doesn't necessarily come from the fact that your ancestors worked really hard. There are lots of ways in which privilege is gained that has nothing to do with the good things and the kind of good life that your ancestors lived. It's about much bigger than that. And we go back to the connections thing, right? So, you know, I remember somebody once saying to me, you switch on your light here in North London and, you know, a flare goes up in Nigeria, you know, by the oil production, because all of those things are interlinked. There's a big chain that links us around the world. And somehow we've got into the position, even though we've got all this knowledge at our fingertips and all of this research that we can do just by tapping into a keyboard, we've still come to a point where we're totally ignorant about what those connections are. And that's not accidental either, I don't think.
No, and it's a standard. What you're describing is a system. And the system, it makes me think, and I just want to share this with you, and I've said it before many times, but when I went to South Africa and saw for myself the HIV/AIDS pandemic as it played out, it was playing out, you know, and it was still at that time in 2004, you could drive anywhere and you would see funeral tents everywhere. You would, you know, if you went to a graveyard, it was something obscene. You know, I think about 350,000 people died unnecessarily. Yes, that pandemic. I understood one thing that was a takeaway from it, that the president of the country was literally bottlenecking access to people getting treatment, life-saving treatment. If the president had given it the green light, those people wouldn't have had to die. That's just the takeaway from it. So I kind of went, you know, the solutions are there. The answers are there. It's not like rocket science, really. If you get political will to change, it happens. It can happen. We're fighting things that actually are being prevented by the fact that political will isn't there. And our challenge in a way is to make it loud enough, to make the roar loud enough. You know, hashtag Me Too is an incredible phenomenon. It's made the whole game shift again, but then it goes away, it goes back into quiet again, because it, you know, oh, you have to almost have a heinous thing come into the light before people go, oh, wow, that's terrible. Everybody goes, whoa, collectively, we need to change it. So it's a terrible thing to say, but we almost need to see the horror, the full horror of it. I mean, it's challenging to be an activist and know what's going on and not be consumed by it. Find a way that you can participate, that you can be part of this movement. That term global feminism really is resonant for me because it's inclusive and it's an umbrella for everyone to say, okay, under the term global feminism, we acknowledge that feminism is not just for women in the West who are pushing to have, you know, they're already in positions of power and they're pushing for, that's great, that needs to happen. But I feel that people are not aware of the feminism that needs to evolve and sort of permeate through the rest of the world, which is enormous.
Like so many, sorry to interrupt you, Annie, but we were talking about this earlier in relation to sustainability. And I was talking with some people from Africa Fashion Week London. And what we were saying was that all the issues around sustainability have been absolutely embedded in some parts of African cultures for years, for centuries, whatever, whether it's fabric making or the way you dye things and so on and so forth. It's there, the way you reuse things, partly because you don't have the wealth to go out and buy something new every time you feel like it. So you repurpose what you've got. And I think around feminism, you know, if we can make global feminism a reality, that will be one hell of a thing. Because what's happened in the past, you're quite right, is that feminism has been not just as Western women, but middle-class Western white women. And I remember back in the 80s, you know, as Black British feminism began to sort of become a thing, there was this, is it womanism or is it feminism? Do we want to distance ourselves from feminism because it's so thoroughly rooted in this form of economic empowerment, which actually isn't inclusive? You know, do we want to be associated with that? I think now we've moved on from that. Well, some people have moved on and some people won't have done. Yes. Fine too, you know, because it doesn't have to be everybody in the same thing. But I do agree with you. It's about that collaborative piece and having a sense of the collective, because then that knits with that idea of connectivity, and you can't allow our sisters, wherever they might be, to be treated in this way, because if you treat them like that, you're treating us like that too.
Not so long ago that we couldn't use the word feminist. I mean, even the circle, we couldn't, like, we didn't say feminist, we just put that down because, well, maybe it might, you know, it's not, could ruffle a few feathers. But then we were working, we were part of something called the Equals campaign. We were trying to get the word feminist back on the table, because it was it's still one of those words, believe it or not, that is still awkward for a lot of people, and yet it has evolved and progressed. And I have this really, really sweet little story, which will take about a minute to tell, where those, just not so long ago, that word, you never heard of it. And if you went to talk to someone in the media, you know, you talk to someone in a magazine, if you thought you're trying to talk about feminism, they don't want to talk to you even. But, you know, the work that was done, that went into getting that word back, was enormous. And one day, my friend who worked, Hester, not Hester, but anyway, my 66-year-old brain, please excuse me for not naming the name, but anyway, sent me a picture standing in front of a newspaper kiosk with the magazines racked up. Every single magazine had the word feminist on the cover, that still makes the hairs on my arms go up, because that was it. That was the moment. You say, oh, tipping point arrived. If the magazines have this word on the front cover and they just didn't want anything to do with it not that long ago, now we're getting into the zeitgeist. That was the feeling, like, wow. So the changes are massive that need to happen.
You've got to take a long view and a short view at the same time. So the long view is that, women in this country have only had the vote for a little over 100 years, or not quite 100 years, not everybody, not every woman. I mean, that's nothing. That's just a couple of generations. So it takes a long time to change those things. Transatlantic slave trade lasted for 300 years. And it took a lot of hard work, obviously, to get rid of that. So that's the long view. But at the same time, we can't afford to sit around and sort of say, yeah, well, it'll all change organically at some point. We have to be, as you and I feel, this kind of compulsion.
I suppose we're idealists, that we look for, but more than that it hurts. It hurts me to see injustice. It pains me seeing racism played out. It hurts. So I live with it and yearn to connect with others who feel the same way. And I want to be part of that bridge, that healing. It's about healing. And yet it's also about calling it out and being angry about it.
By the same token, for me, at any rate, as I get older, I think now the important thing to do is to support and nurture the new agents for change, for world benefit or whatever, particularly those young women who, need that support and encouragement. And what are the ways, the very concrete ways in which we can create those opportunities? Succession planning would be the grand term you'd use if you were in a corporation or something.
I think probably we've had enough of your time, and I really want to thank you, Lola, because it is such a privilege to have you join us today with your extraordinary, we didn't even get into your life or your background or anything like that, but I feel like we have to join forces, you and I, that we are singing from the same hymn, but we are on the same page. And let's just continue as we do, as passionate feminist, global feminists that we are, in actual fact. Let's carry on and just, it's that thing about not losing hope, not, being re-energized. We continue. This is what we're born to do, and we'll continue until we pass on. As you said, legacy. I love that.
It's the shared energy that I like. And that's why I always say to people, don't get downhearted, don't feel depressed, don't feel there's nothing you can change, because you need to just keep recharging yourself and being surrounded by those people who are going to make that change, and you're going to help them. So yay! Yay!
Thank you, Annie and Lola, for such an inspiring conversation. I hope everyone enjoyed that. It leaves me just to say, if you are interested in finding out more about the Circle, please sign up to our newsletter. They're going to put the link in the chat box. And also make sure you have taken your pledge for this year. It's International Women's Day is a wonderful moment to celebrate women, but we also want to make sure that we are all working towards striving for change. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible for you to pick a pledge or to choose your own. So I am going to hand over back to Annie for a final few words, and then I think she'll have something special for you all. All right, good night or good morning, wherever you are. Happy International Women's Day.
Well, everyone, I just wanted to say finally, thank you so much for coming and joining our Circle evening. It's been quite an adventure altogether. We've been going for quite a few years now, and we keep trying to build momentum and to contribute to the global feminist movement around the world, where there is so much need, as you probably know by now. I hope it's been an inspiring evening for you, and there's little more to do other than do what I usually do, which is sing a little song. And this one is an oldie, like me, but Goldie. Hope you enjoy it. Well, there was a time when they used to say that behind every great man there had to be a great woman. Well, in these times of change, we know that it's no longer true. So we're coming out of the kitchen, 'cause there's something we forgot to say to you. We say sisters are doing it for themselves. Oh yes, standing on their own 2 feet, yes, bringing on their own ways. Don't you know that sisters are doing it for themselves? Woo! This is a song to celebrate the conscious liberation of the female state. Mothers, daughters, and their daughters too. Yeah. Woman to woman, singing with you. The inferior sex has got a new exterior. Oh yes. We got doctors, lawyers, politicians too. Ooh, yeah. Everybody, take a look around. Can't you see? Can't you see? Can't you see? There's a woman right next to you. Oh, standing there, sisters are doing it for themselves. Oh, yes, standing on their own 2 feet. Oh, bringing on their own mess. Don't you know that sisters are doing it for themselves? Oh, yes, sisters are doing it for themselves. Once again, sisters are doing it like they always did, and they always will, and they always can. Yes, for themselves. Thank you.